We've been focusing on the question, is Jesus God? We looked at the historical record, the secular record about Jesus, and then more recently we've been focusing on the Christian account of Jesus, which is, of course, the New Testament documents themselves. And we've looked at the reliability of the New Testament. Today I want to move on and I want to ask the question, what evidence do we have to suggest that Jesus was more than just a religious leader? Now, the irony here is that in the early days of the church, the early days following Christ, there were a lot of people who claimed that Jesus was God, but that he was not human. So the claim is that at the incarnation, while remaining fully God, Jesus became fully man, right? Became one of us. While clinging to deity, he added humanity to deity, and he enters time and space through a virgin's womb. So early on, there were people influenced by Greek philosophy, which is very down on the physical world. They said that there's no way God could become human. There's no way that God could take on flesh and material form. So they claimed that Jesus only looked like a person. He wasn't really a person. We call this Docetism. And John will write about this in his first letter, not the Gospel of John, but he will make a big point out of the fact that Jesus, he ate and you could touch him and he got tired and he had a physical body. Okay, so today we don't have that issue. We're not struggling with Docetism, those that say Jesus was God, but he wasn't a person. We just have a lot of people who say, well, I think that Jesus was a person. I just don't think he was God. And some will say that he doesn't even claim to be God. So there's two parts to this. One is, what does he claim, which is what I want to focus on today. And then there's another is there reason to believe that? So the question before us then is, what evidence do we have that Jesus claimed to be God? So I want to read out of Matthew chapter 16, verse 13. So we pick up right after the point where Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And then Jesus asked, well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, the question is there any evidence for that? Were they right? And I think, again, there's two things to think about here. One is Jesus actually claiming to be God? And that's what I want to focus on. So, look, it's worth noting that when you look at the other great moral or religious leaders, Muhammad, Confucius, right? I mean, you go down the Buddha, the Dalai Lama. I don't know who you want to put in that category, Moses or Abraham. When you look at great religious leaders, and you see that were you to ask them the question, are you God? They would quickly duck and say, no, I'm not claiming to be God. Don't get me wrong. I may be a great teacher, I may be a prophet, but oftentimes they claim they go the opposite direction. So it's worth noting that Jesus, while he is profoundly humble, right? I mean, he goes to the end of the line, he's putting the needs of others ahead of himself, he's washing the feet of the disciples, right? I mean, he's just he's living in somewhat in poverty. While there's nothing about Jesus in terms of claiming to be, majestic and claiming all these rights and privileges to himself, he repeatedly makes the biggest, boldest claims possible. He claims to be eternal. He claims to be the judge of everyone everywhere. He claims to be the light of the world and the bread of life. He says, no one comes to the Father but through me, right? He makes the biggest claims possible. He can forgive sins. He's going to return at the end of the age, and everyone is going to worship him. So while remaining humble in terms of his lifestyle, he makes the biggest, boldest claims. So let's turn to John, a second passage here that's important. John chapter 20, verse 26. So this is after the resurrection. Jesus has appeared to the disciples. Thomas famously wasn't there. and he has appeared to them, and Thomas was gone. And then when Thomas comes back, the disciples say, "Oh, Thomas, you missed it. We saw Jesus. He's actually risen from the dead. He's God." And Thomas's response is to say, unless I actually see this for myself, unless I put my hands in the holes in his hands and in the holes in his side, I'm not going to believe. And so then later on, we pick up the story in verse 26, and Jesus came back and stood among them again. "Peace be with you." Then he goes to Thomas, who's there this time. He goes to Thomas and he says, "Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas's response is to say, "My Lord and my God." And what does Jesus say to that? He doesn't say, Thomas, no, you've gone too far. Don't go to that extent. I'm not claiming to be God. Instead, what he says is, "Thomas, you were a little slow on the uptake, but now you've got it." And then he says, "Because you've seen me, you believe. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." So there are people who reportedly say that Jesus never claims to be God. Okay. No. So some people are saying they don't trust the New Testament documents. That's a different topic. But some say the New Testament never claims that Jesus claims to be God. No, in so many different ways, he claims to be God. Let's just note, put a little stop here for the week. Let's just note that Jesus is put to death for claiming to be God, right? That's what so incensed the Jewish religious leaders. Now, they're not in charge. They don't have the right to bring a capital punishment on Jesus. If they did, they would have stoned him for blasphemy, for claiming to be God. But they rip their clothes when they hear him talk. They say he's claiming to be God. We got to put him to death. And then they take him to the Romans, who put him to death for sedition, for rivaling Caesar. Although Pontius Pilate washes his hands and he says, "No, this is a religious claim that's being made." So, look, there are good reasons to believe that Jesus claims to be God. We're going to keep looking at Jesus next week. Have a good week.